This is CBC Here and Now.
There have been many people, I think the women of Newfoundland and Labrador and some of the men have really come out in support in a big way for her, and it was very, very important to her.
The female victim of the Doug Snellgrove case is thanking the public for its support. The RNC officer will go to jail for 4 years, but he still has another chance to appeal.
It's a pretty significant day legally, and of course for the survivors, this is that much more available to compensate them for the terrible harm they suffered.
The province is buying church-owned schools, ensuring no disruption to the education system and further growing the pot of money for abuse survivors.
3 municipalities on the Northeast Avalon say they'll work together, but Mount Pearl is going its own way.
I think we can sharpen our focus and realize our goals and focus on our priorities more, and I think that makes sense for the city of Mount Pearl.
Coming up on Here and Now.
Good evening and welcome to Here and Now. Thousands of workers across the province set up picket lines this morning outside federal government offices. Almost 6,000 workers are on strike in Newfoundland and Labrador from the Canada Revenue Agency, the Treasury Board, and other sectors that are covered by the Public Service Alliance of Canada. They set up picket lines in St. John's, Gander, and in Labrador. They're part of the 155,000 federal workers who are on strike at locations right across the country. Now, this strike could affect you. It's expected to create delays for some government services. Wages, remote work, and job security are key issues for the union.
This strike will last as long as the employer, Treasury Board and the federal government are unwilling to provide an offer that meets or addresses our key issues. And right now, we've had progress, but we still haven't gotten to a point that we have an agreement that meets those needs and addresses our key priorities. And we're willing to stay out as long as it takes to get that. But we are committed to reaching that deal at the table. Our bargaining teams are still in Ottawa. They're still there waiting for that offer to come from the employer. And it's just time for them to stop dragging their feet and get to the table and negotiate.
Well, a picket line is set up outside the Wabush Airport. 9 workers there are affected by this strike, as well as workers at the Service Canada office in Labrador West. Now, they tell CBC News the union is in a cool-down period after negotiations broke down.
A lot of people are stopping to have a chat with our members. They support us 100%. They think that what the government is offering us is a joke. 2% is for milk, not for workers. We've been bargaining for close to 2 years without a contract, and they haven't brought a reasonable offer to the table with inflation. And in this area locally, we're the only workers. We're not even making close to $30 an hour here. Like, the wages don't match inflation.
And stay tuned, we'll have more on the strike and a full interview with PSAC's Regional Vice President. That's coming up in about 30 minutes on Here and Now. Well, another teen has been charged in relation to the attack on a student at Prince of Wales Collegiate in St. John's last month. The RNC arrested a 17-year-old male yesterday. He's now facing charges of attempted murder, assault with a weapon, aggravated assault, and failure to comply with an earlier court order. The teen is the 5th person to be charged in the attack. 18-year-old Tyler Greening is facing charges including attempted murder. 3 other teens between the ages of 14 and 16 are also charged. And the Labrador-Island Link system has been formally commissioned. That's according to Newfoundland and Labrador Hydro. The company says the link was commissioned last Friday, meaning the entire Lower Churchill project from the power station to the transmission system is considered tested and finished. Hydro has yet to give the final cost, though. It's working with the province on a rate mitigation plan. It says the public can expect an update in the coming months.
Well, taking a look outside at the cameras, we do have some wet weather, especially on the south coast. Burgeo seeing those showers. Same thing for Dunn's River. Otherwise, if we take a look outside St. John's, anyway, at least the Narrows, we've got some fog patches around. It's been relatively dry for a good chunk of the day, but that is going to change as we head through the night tonight and into tomorrow morning. In fact, we do have the potential for some snow in the forecast at the moment. So we've got an area of low pressure to the north. Otherwise, there's an area of low pressure to the south that's getting organized, and that's what's going to bring some of this rain and snow over the next 24 to 36 hours. So today we can really see that onshore flow in effect. 2-3 degrees, even 1 degree in Twillingate. The further away you get, Deer Lake 10 degrees, 11 in Stephenville. So a beautiful afternoon, although wet in some cases, but we still have some of that milder air up across Labrador as well. 7 degrees in Happy Valley Goose Bay. So we've got jet stream dipping at the moment. As we head through the next couple of days, that's going to start to climb and edge further north. We'll see some more ridging. And what does that mean? It means some milder air, especially up across Labrador. Unfortunately, we're still staying in that onshore flow, though, along the coast. We'll talk about what that means when I come back.
Thanks, Ashley. Well, the woman at the heart of the Doug Snellgrove case is thanking the public for its support. The Court of Appeal denied the police officer's appeal yesterday, which means he'll go to prison for 4 years. As Here Now's Malone Mullen reports, it was welcome news for the victim.
We can't show you the woman who endured 3 trials and 6 years of media attention in a case that prompted protests and public outrage, and yesterday ended with a police officer going to jail for abusing his power and sexually assaulting her. But a lawyer who's been advising the woman through it all does have a message. Despite the trauma and years of reliving it in court, the survivor of the Doug Snellgrove case took strength from complete strangers.
There have been many people, I think the women of Newfoundland and Labrador and some of the men have really come out in support in a big way for her, and it was very, very important to her.
She's known across the province simply as Jane Doe. Her case acted as a catalyst for other women to come forward with allegations of their own about sexual misconduct within the RNC ranks. Lynn Moore is representing some of those women who've learned from Jane Doe's own struggle with the criminal system.
I know that this woman has prompted a lot of people to call me about other assaults by working RNC officers who abuse their position of power and trust. And those women are not interested in the criminal process. They're interested in the civil process. And I really feel like we've hit the tip of the iceberg with that.
For those watching the case unfold, yesterday's decision brought both comfort and skepticism.
I am encouraged that because there is progress, people may be empowered to fight and to step out and to reclaim their voices. And I think that's important and essential. But I'm also concerned that recent survivors would feel discouraged as well because of the length of time that this process is being taken.
Bethany Jacobs works with sex assault survivors. She calls the conviction for them a double-edged sword.
There's a feeling of powerlessness, an experience of powerlessness that people often forget. I would caution against only focusing on celebrating in this context, because then you might do the harm of neglecting the grief people are having.
While Snellgrove's appeal was denied, he can still ask for another one, this time from the Supreme Court of Canada. Even though Snellgrove is a convicted sex offender, he technically still works here at RNC headquarters. A spokesperson for the force said he'll remain suspended without pay until the court process is entirely done with. Until then, he's still a police officer, even while behind bars. Malone Mullen, CBC News, St. John's.
Across the country, if someone is unsatisfied with the actions of police, they can file a complaint. But that process is not well understood, and it's often confusing. Our Atlantic Investigative Unit is examining what people are complaining about and what happens to those complaints. Shayna Luck shares her findings examining police conduct in Nova Scotia.
This is just some of what we were able to get. We analyzed information from more than a decade of files, which made accusations against hundreds of officers. Some common accusations included things like rudeness, neglect of duty, or excessive force. Some accusations came from the public, but some came from other officers. 55 out of the 676 officers were disciplined more than once. Senior officers investigated. Sometimes they handed out discipline, most commonly fines or reprimands. But in the majority of cases, there was no discipline because the police couldn't substantiate the complaint. I reached out to several police chiefs and the Nova Scotia Chiefs of Police Association to talk about this. I received a short statement that said chiefs take allegations of officer misconduct very seriously, but the overwhelming majority of officers take great pride in their role and duties. And, they wrote, it is important to remember that complaints do not necessarily correlate to a need for concern about police misconduct. The majority of complaints are proven unfounded. We asked to talk about why that is, but they didn't respond. In Nova Scotia, there have been questions for years about public trust in the complaint system. 4 years ago, a report on police street checks in Halifax found Black citizens were disproportionately stopped. But the report found many don't complain because they don't trust police to investigate themselves. This expert in civilian oversight says trust is a concern elsewhere in Canada too.
It's a serious issue. People do not trust that the police will investigate themselves with the kind of thoroughness, integrity, reliability that an external agency might do.
The Halifax Police Union president says people who aren't satisfied with the internal police investigation can appeal, and that appeal will be heard by people outside the police department.
The public should have confidence in it because at the end of the day, there is always the possibility that that review is going to occur.
But he acknowledges it can take up to 4 years to get an appeal heard, which is bad for everyone involved. One of the recommendations from Nova Scotia's Street Check report was to set up a committee to examine the police complaints process. We asked the Provincial Justice Minister if that's happened.
So we're not there yet.
Minister Brad Johns says he has trust in the complaint system, but he hopes to set up a committee to examine it later this year. Experts who studied the complaint system told me they believe it needs a rethink because it's important for the legitimacy of police that the public trusts they're being policed properly and fairly. Shayna Luck, CBC News, Halifax.
Well, back in this province, a cloud of uncertainty that's been hanging over some prominent schools has been cleared, and there's millions of dollars more to compensate survivors of abuse within the Catholic Church. Those were the two outcomes of a court hearing in St. John's this morning. Here now's Terry Roberts reports.
Plenty of buzz in the St. John's courtroom. And for good reason. A legal battle averted, an agreement in principle to settle a dispute over some church-owned schools, and help to compensate victims of abuse at the hands of Catholic clergy and those who ran the notorious Mount Cashel orphanage.
It's a pretty significant day legally and in every other way for the people involved.
The provincial government has agreed to pay $13 million to the Roman Catholic Episcopal Corporation of St. John's. In return, full ownership of 32 church-owned schools on the Avalon and Burin Peninsulas. Schools such as Gonzaga, O'Donnell, and Marystown Central High, most with very religious names, a legacy of the old denominational education system. The deal is the latest milestone in the insolvency of the St. John's Archdiocese, which is selling off property in order to pay claims to abuse victims. The liquidation has so far raised more than $30 million. Churches, parish halls, vacant lands, all going to the highest bidder. The school's deal will push that pot of money closer to the target of $50 million. It will also ensure there will be no disruptions to the school system.
We're glad it's all resolved, and the schools will continue as they've always been.
The denominational system was abolished in the 90s. The province then amended the Schools Act to allow it to continue to occupy church-owned schools for as long as they were needed for educational purposes. Today's agreement reflects the investments made by taxpayers to maintain the schools and the ownership rights of the Archdiocese.
The government had a duty to be mindful of the public purse, and we had a duty, as did the Episcopal Corporation and the Monitor, to maximise the funds available. And we all had a duty, I guess, to minimise the risk to our clients. So that's a number that we arrived at, and it's a number that I feel is a reasonable compromise.
But this won't be a simple process. All sides expect some complications, as surveys and title searches are carried out on properties that may have very long and unclear histories.
We had property here that the church purchased in pounds sterling back in the 1860s.
But it's a further step forward in this complex and, for many, painful process, with money expected to start flowing to survivors later this year. Terry Roberts, CBC News, St. John's.
Well, the provincial government needs to step up and do something. That's according to both opposition parties, who are reacting to a feature story we brought you last night. It's about 2 children with autism who have been dismissed from daycare due to a shortage of early childhood educators. Here now's Heather Gillis reports.
Kind of outrageous.
That's PC education critic Barry Petton's reaction to news that 2 children with autism were dismissed from daycare. William Lomatang and Benjamin Pike, both from Paradise, lost their places at 2 different daycares because there aren't enough ECEs to support them. Both families say the daycare dismissals are discriminatory. For NDP leader Jim Dinn, it harkens back to a human rights complaint involving a local deaf student.
All you've got to look at is the most recent case with Carter Churchill, the human rights case, where his education was impacted.
Petton blames the dismissals on poor planning for $10 a day childcare. He says it created a surge in demand for daycare with too few ECEs to keep up. And while more capacity was added to childcare training programs, he says it'll take time for them to graduate. Meanwhile, Dinn, a former teacher, says care workers need to be valued and says the new ECE wage grid isn't enough.
Whether it's health, education, there's a human resources crisis. And I can go back to the fact that it's been a long time building about failure of government to bring in the necessary measures to make these jobs more attractive. Early childhood educators, as I understand it, don't have benefits such as health, a pension, or sick leave. Well, they'll start making that part of the remuneration that they get.
And we've got a teaching crisis, childcare crisis, and healthcare crisis, and a cost of living crisis. So, I mean, government needs to, I know it's unfortunate, but government needs to really step up and do something.
Both opposition parties say this issue falls squarely at the feet of government, but Education Minister John Haggie hasn't been available for interviews, so we haven't been able to ask him any questions.
Acceptable for a minister of this crown, this government, that response to me angered me, to quite frank with you, and I think it should anger any family out there. It's not acceptable.
Petton also believes government should reverse a 2017 legislation change that now disallows other workers with first aid and clear background checks to work in daycares as support workers in the interim.
And I mean, we'd be very supportive of any change like that if that come into the House of Assembly.
Heather Gillis, CBC News, St. John's.
Well, 3 municipalities on the Northeast Avalon are agreeing to work together to attract businesses and jobs. St. John's, Paradise, and Conception Bay South have signed a letter of intent to create a regional economic development agency. But one of the area's biggest municipalities, Mount Pearl, has opted out. Here now's Mark Quinn has the details.
The 3 mayors say this is an important step towards attracting more big industry and work to their municipalities.
This will set the stage for more investments, more opportunities, and more success on the national and international stage.
Conception Bay South's mayor says he hopes that attracting businesses in fields like the ocean sciences will lift some of the tax burden off his residents.
We don't have the big industrial base the size of Paradise or St. John's. We need to expand that. We need to do the work necessary to increase that commercial income so that we can alleviate some of the burden that we're seeing in increased costs for our residents.
Meanwhile, the mayor of Paradise says collaboration doesn't necessarily spell the end of all competition. But for some things, he says it just makes more sense to work together.
Competition is always good, but this is competition with the global network. This is we're looking at huge projects. We're looking at things that'll globally. We've got to look at globally and to attract businesses and firms to this region and to the greater Avalon area. That's what it's all about.
So why isn't Mount Pearl here?
Mount Pearl was part of the discussions right up until the 11th hour, and at the end of the day, they decided to do something different and not join in with us.
We just feel it makes more sense for Mount Pearl to focus more on what's happening in the city of Mount Pearl.
The mayor of Mount Pearl says contributing to a regional body doesn't seem like the best use of his community's resources.
You know, Mount Pearl stepped back a little bit, and rather investing some of our staff or some of our tax dollars into an organization to run economic development, we feel we've got the staff here that can work both within the city of Mount Pearl for our priorities as well as to collaborate with the region.
The mayor of Mount Pearl says the door isn't closed. The city's taking a wait-and-see approach. Dave Akers says it could still join at a later date. Mark Quinn, CBC News, Mount Pearl.
NSO is bringing comic books to life through music. We'll give you a sneak peek behind its upcoming Heroes and Villains show that's coming up.
Well, there's a chance of some rain tomorrow and then also some snow by the time we get into Friday morning. We'll talk all about that in a few minutes.
Newfoundland Rogues have a special team member that you won't find here on the basketball floor.
I prepared the prayers in the sense that I wanted them to listen and to be cared for.
She's out like rock. She carries us. She gives everywhere we down. She's there, always in the locker room.
I'll tell you all about the Newfoundland Rogues' Sister Betty coming up tomorrow on Here and Now.
This weather update is brought to you by the Healthcare Foundation Home Lottery. Early bird prize deadline is midnight Friday, May 5th. Order tickets now at hcfhomelottery.ca.
Well, it was a pretty chilly day today, and some snow on the way, you said before the break.
Yeah, sorry. We're into, what is it, middle of April now? So we shouldn't be surprised to see the snow. I know it feels like we've kind of turned a corner, but like I said earlier this week, whatever does fall is not going to last long.
I mean, May 24th weekend, it could snow.
Exactly, and it's happened many times. Yes. But yeah, onshore flow keeping us kind of cool along the northeast coast, which is typical for the spring. Let's take a look at where the province sat today as far as temperatures are concerned. Anywhere from 1 to 3 degrees for the most part. You head away from that onshore flow and your temperatures are more spring-like, that's for sure. 10 degrees in both Deer Lake and Stephenville Rec House area. So about 9 degrees today. Your winds have finally eased off in that area. And then up across Labrador, temperatures above zero, 1 to 7 degrees. Was the daytime highs today. Now if we take a look at what's going on at the moment, still sitting there across Labrador, temperatures are starting to dip across the island and they're going to moderate as we head through the overnight tonight. We saw some freezing rain earlier today as well, very minimal but still, and we may see that as we head through the night tonight again. Not a whole lot going on. We do have some showers. They're not overly heavy. Some drizzle in the mix as well as an area of low pressure starts to get organized along southern areas of the island. Another one up across Labrador is bringing plenty of cloud cover and it's going to be unsettled for you as well. Finally seeing some of the radar activity show up on the west coast. Holyrood's still offline at the moment. But yeah, that's pretty much it. We will start to see some more moisture move in as we head through the day tomorrow. So I don't think we'll see too much in the way of rain through the overnight. Still some showers for sure, but it won't be heavy rain through the overnight. And we'll see some showers developing again, or sticking around, I should say, for the southwestern portion of the island as we get into Thursday morning. Now, some of this may mix with snow or even freezing rain again, as we see those temperatures hovering around the 0 degree mark, especially in the higher elevations. They'll be cooler, but now near the surface, everything should pretty much fall as rain for those of you on the west coast, south coast, and then through parts of central, we may see some flurries in the mix as well. Now, as far as winds are concerned, they'll stay relatively light for the most part. Easterlies will stick around, keeping that onshore flow and cooler temperatures for the Avalon. And then as far as Labrador is concerned, Lab City will be the coolest at -4 with the chance of some flurries. And then we're hovering in and around 0 or +1 for northern portions of Labrador. And that means you could see some mixing, either rain or snow or wet snow through the overnight tonight. Now taking a look at the future tracker as we head into tomorrow, the area of low pressure to the south is going to start to fill in. So as we get into the afternoon hours tomorrow, don't be surprised to see some showers that may be heavy at times along the northeast coast, also mixing with snow for the northern peninsula. And then we've got that in the higher elevations just because of the temperatures at this point for the southwest. Other than that, all along the south coast, this should be rain as you see your temperatures pretty warm. Now, it'll continue to fill in as we head into Thursday night. This is when we could start to see some of the accumulating snow from the northern peninsula through parts of central and even the northern Avalon at this point. That's what it's looking like. So that will move through fairly quickly. By the time we get into Friday morning, that should end, but don't be surprised to see some accumulation, certainly on those grassy surfaces. Now, there's a big discrepancy on how much is going to fall. A good bet we'll see somewhere between 2 to 5 centimeters of snow. Higher elevations, you may pick up a little bit more than that. But at this point, not looking like a super significant event. It's just the fact that we are in April and there's still that potential. Temperatures tomorrow will hover around 2 to 5 degrees for the most part, maybe a little bit more than that through Grand Falls, Windsor, Stephenville area. Winds will be out of the east around 20 to 40 kilometers per hour, and those will be out of the northeast as you head towards the west coast. Now for Labrador, towards the coast, temperatures are again above zero, so either showers or flurries through the day. Not overly impressive as far as winds are concerned, but the coldest temperatures will be in Lab City. Now, you're looking at temperatures in the teens in the coming days, so that'll be nice, but we'll talk all about that when I come back.
The Newfoundland Symphony Orchestra is getting in on the action for a new show called Heroes and Villains. 85 years ago, the Man of Steel made his action comic debut, helping launch an entire superhero universe that's still going strong today. Well, this Friday, the NSO will perform a slew of superhero scores, from the Avengers to Superman. Video producer Daryl Murphy grabbed his cape and his camera and swung by last night's rehearsal.
This is a job for Superman.
The concert starts at 7, but we're encouraging people to come around 6 p.m. or just after. On the upper concourse of the Arts and Culture Center, we're going to have costume contest. We're going to have 15 cosplayers from Sci-Fi on the Rock dressed in superhero costumes. People can get their pictures taken and meet and greet with some of the superheroes. So it's going to be a great family time. The concert's only about an hour and 20 minutes or so. So at 7 o'clock start, it won't be a late night, so you can bring the entire family. And kids can get in for $10 if they're with an adult.
Superhero film music now is quite similar in some respects to some of our classical music, because there are fantastic composers and composers who write for orchestra too. I'm thinking of John Williams and Danny Elfman. Both of them will be featured in this concert. And the scores, the writing is just incredible. Very challenging for the orchestra, but that makes it very interesting for a lighter family type of concert for us. We're still staying in with repertoire that's fun to play. Try watching a movie at home or even a TV show and turn off the sound and the soundtrack, and you'll see it's quite a different experience. If you start listening to the music in movies, you'll see how it follows the atmospheres the film directors wanted to create.
This story was actually written 3 years ago, just before the pandemic. We were supposed to do it in 2020. And the story is basically a group of 4 children who are hanging out with their babysitter. They decide to play superheroes. And then, of course, as their imagination comes to life, the audience experiences what they're going through. There's a supervillain whose name is Cubicle, whose mission is to annihilate the arts from the city, including music and, of course, the symphony. So his goal is to basically stop the symphony from making these silly concerts, and the children decide that it's their goal to stop him from doing that.
So I play Harmony in this production. I'm the cool babysitter. I let all the kids play superheroes, and I'm just awesome. I'm an awesome babysitter. I'm the coolest.
I am playing Sketch. He is basically, all of his lines are superhero movie quotes. So he's basically like a walking superhero encyclopedia.
I want them to feel like they're watching a superhero movie, like the excitement of it, the fun of it, to have a great time.
I hope that they really enjoy the show. I hope they I hope they feel the magic of the symphony and what we're doing.
In regards to superheroes and music, what is it about superhero music that people gravitate towards?
Yeah, I think music is a huge part of superhero movies and the entire legacy of the genre, really. It really elevates the story and creates this big, monumental, majestic feel. It enhances the villains with, very dark music and dissonance, and I think music's an incredibly huge part of the success of those movies. It's a really accessible night for people that may have never been to the NSO before, something that everyone can enjoy and really dip their toe in, maybe, to experience an orchestra concert.
Tens of thousands of federal workers on strike, with more than a dozen picket lines in this province. More on the state of the public servants' strike just ahead. Well, Public Service Alliance of Canada employees are on strike today. Over 155,000 workers across Canada are currently off the job, with about 6,000 of them in this province. Joining me now to talk about it is PSAC's Regional Executive Vice President in Atlantic Canada, Chris De Liberatore. Thanks so much for being here.
Happy to be here, Karen. Thank you for having me.
Well, the union had set a deadline last night and no deal was struck, and now the workers have mobilized. They're on the picket line. So can you walk us through what happened when the final decision was made to strike last night?
As you heard, when Chris Aylward, our national president, set that deadline, that if we did not have a deal by 9 p.m. Eastern time last night, our members would be taking to the picket lines at 12:01 a.m. this morning. And that's exactly what happened. While there had been a bit of progress that was achieved at the table, we still didn't see enough movement on behalf of the government and an offer from the government that met our members' needs or addressed our key issues. So we made that tough decision. It was a decision we didn't want to have to make, but we did make that tough decision to initiate strike action.
There are about 18 picket lines, I think, set up right across this province, including one in front of Seamus O'Regan's constituency office. So what message is PSAC trying to send there?
Well, with the Minister's office, he is the Minister of Labour, Seamus O'Regan, and he's also a member of the Treasury Board. So he can have some direct influence on the Minister, on the President of Treasury Board, Mona Fortier, to put some pressure to come to the table with a deal that does address our members' needs for wages that keep up with the rising cost of inflation, and that address our other key issues around remote work and contracting out and inclusive workplaces.
Yeah, can you tell us more about that? What's at issue here? What are the main sticking points in this deal?
No, obviously the main sticking points are the wages. We've been asking for 4.5% over 3 years. The initial offer from the employer was an average of 2.06% over 4 years. The most recent offer was 9%, but that still doesn't quite meet the rising cost of inflation that we've been speaking with respect to our members' needs. You know, inflation has been around 13.8%. Our ask is 13.5%, so we're still slightly below that, and we believe that's a fair ask. But we're just looking for something that meets that need of keeping up with the rising cost of inflation. The other issues, as I mentioned, is around reasonable access to remote work and ensuring that our members have that ability to be able, and not all of our members, because not all of our members want to work from home, but making sure that the ability for those who do have a need for whatever their personal circumstances might be, to be able to work from home without it being unreasonably denied.
And on that point, there are a lot of people in this country who don't have the option to work remotely. Do you think that you'll get much sympathy from the public on that particular point?
The ability to work from home, even a lot of our own members don't have that ability to work from home. So it's not just about looking after that one key issue. There's a myriad of issues. But again, it's about making sure there's available and appropriate access to it, that it's not unreasonably denied, that those who can have that ability to work from home, and where it does work for them, are able to access that without it being unreasonably denied.
And what is the status of negotiations right now? Are there any indications on how long this strike might last?
This strike will last as long as the employer, Treasury Board and the federal government are unwilling to provide an offer that meets or addresses our key issues. And right now we've had progress, but we still haven't gotten to a point that we have an agreement that meets those needs and addresses our key priorities. And we're willing to stay out as long as it takes to get that. But we are committed to reaching that deal at the table. Our bargaining teams are still in Ottawa. They're still there waiting for that offer to come from the employer. And it's just time for them to stop dragging their feet and get to the table and negotiate.
Well, Chris De Liberatore, thank you so much for this.
Thank you.
5, 6, 7, 8. Where's our contract? Why so late?
Well, workers have been without a contract for about 2 years. As you just heard, pay levels, remote work, and job security are key issues for the union. Almost 160,000 workers are affected by the contract negotiation, but close to 50,000 remain at work because they're deemed essential. Canadians could be facing delays for a number of government services, including taxes, passport applications, and immigration. And two key figures in the labor dispute spoke out today about their positions.
We will continue to work with the PSAC to reach agreements that are fair and competitive, but we cannot do that unless the union is prepared to compromise. We cannot write a blank check.
Mona Forte, the president of Treasury Board, is on record saying remote work is the way of the future. So why don't they come to the table and stick to their statements and say, if remote work is the way of the future, well, why don't you give it to your own employees?
Well, NDP leader Jagmeet Singh showed his support for striking workers. Earlier today, he paid a visit to the picket lines on Parliament Hill. This afternoon, Singh repeated his pledge that the NDP would never support back-to-work legislation.
Because I was an Army brat, it's like we moved to a new city like every 3 years. Just when you start to get some roots and start to kind of fit in a little bit, you're uprooted.
Anybody came up to me and said, yeah, I really want to go teach abroad or go abroad for a bit, I encouraged them because it was one of the best experiences I've had.
The stories and people behind the pictures. Talking connection with our colleagues at The Signal. That's just ahead. and Now has been teaming up with our colleagues at CBC Radio's The Signal for a conversation about community and connection. It's done through the lens of a St. John's street photographer and his subjects. Well, tonight the group talks about finding friends and a sense of self at a vulnerable time when you're young.
So this is my friend Judd. We met from the early 90s and we stayed in touch. Judd's a graphic designer, musician, and good friend of mine. We kind of lived parallel lives with design work in the IT industry. And yeah, just a good friend that I stayed in touch with.
Fill us in on the rest of yourself there, Judd.
Well, as Richie said, I'm a graphic designer and an illustrator. And for many years, those were my sideline gigs because I played music for a living for almost a decade. And but then a bunch of years ago, I switched back and went back to doing illustration and design. And that's kind of my main gig these days, mostly designing stuff for the music industry. But over the last few years, I started doing a lot of stuff with certain TV shows and indie films too. So it's been a lot of fun.
Talking to you folks before, I find all your stories really interesting because you all have, obviously, I mean, everyone has a different story, right? But everyone here, as your stories connect to Richie, I just find them really interesting. So for you, your parents were like, was it your dad that was in the military?
Yeah, my father was in the military, yeah.
So what was it like kind of coming here at that time, trying to find a sense of belonging or to fit in at the same time when you're meeting Richie?
Well, I was, because I was an Army brat, it's like we moved to a new city like every 3 years. And so I was always the new guy.
Yeah.
And as a kid, that's really a huge adjustment. So you're always moving in as the new person. And then just when you start to get some roots and start to kind of fit in a little bit, you're uprooted and thrown into another town and you start over again. So around the time that I met Richie, was around, I didn't know anybody really. Like I was suddenly living in Newfoundland and had no roots and didn't know anybody. And so I went to the mall because they had a great arcade.
Same here.
Yeah. And so they had pinball machines and they had Tekken and Tetris. And so I went to the mall. And but I didn't really know anybody. Like when I first met Richie, he was one of the first people that I met here.
What was it like growing up? We're talking as we're moving through the 90s in Newfoundland. So this is Cobb moratorium time. Economy wasn't great. So as you're growing up and trying to find what you want to do with your lives, what was that like?
It was really desperate, and you didn't have a lot of hope for the future, in all honesty. Like, I mean, without being too dark about it, it's like that era, we saw all the adult figures losing their jobs, having to go back to school and learn new things. They thought they had careers, and suddenly all their careers were taken from them. And here we were, the young kids coming through high school, seeing that happen, and then looking at our future and going like, what are we going to do? If there's nothing for them, what are we supposed to do? And I remember it just being really scary. And most people I knew who were in university, they were like doing masters in universities and working at fast food jobs because that was the only work you could get. And yeah, I mean, St. John's and Newfoundland in the 90s was a dark spot.
Yeah, because both of you are a little bit older than me. I was coming through in the late 90s for my teens, and for me it was like, not a lot of jobs around, so I ended up going in the reserves, trying to go through MUN, and then I ended up going to South Korea to work because I didn't know what else to do, and there wasn't, the opportunity of the oil boom years wasn't really there yet, and I just kind of was following a bunch of other folks from the trends that were set in the 90s. But when you were in South Korea, what was the talk about going? Because this was way more recent than way back when I was there than when we were talking about.
Well, amongst my peers, it wasn't very popular. Like, I would say one other friend of mine expressed interest in it, but it wasn't something that felt like they were being pulled into doing because they didn't have to. So most of my peers never really got into the idea of traveling that far away. Yeah.
What did it give you for traveling and being? Because there's another connection with culture for you being in Korea for just in that Asia Pacific region too, right?
Yeah, it was for me. It was actually a really great opportunity for me to sort of be more independent, and I felt like this was really good for me to sort of get out of my shell because I would say I was very introverted and I was a lot more, I would say, socially awkward before I left, and I felt like by traveling alone and living on my own, at the time I didn't realize it, but I felt like I learned a lot about myself by doing that, and I felt like that was the push I needed to be a better version of myself. And yeah, I was very glad that I did it. And I, you know, if anybody came up to me and said, yeah, I really want to like go teach abroad or like go abroad for a bit, like I encouraged them to go, because it was one of the best experiences I've had.
But as you're doing that, the economic times were better for Newfoundland and Labrador. What was it like kind of looking back home and thinking about here as you're kind of doing it? Because back when I was doing it, it was like, well, I don't know how good the economy is. And then I finally got this message of like, oh, things are doing pretty well back home. Maybe I'll go back home and try to get a job.
Yeah, I think when it was here, and probably it wasn't as dire as say in the 90s, but a lot of my friends still had to move away because a lot of their jobs were very specialized and they had to leave. So unless you were in the oil and gas industry, a lot of my peers and of course myself, we didn't feel like there wasn't too much here, and that was another reason I decided to leave, to just find more opportunity.
Well, we talked about the potential for some snow as we head through the night on Thursday and into Friday morning. I'll show you that one more time as we see some more moisture move in and temperatures dropping a little bit as we head into Friday morning. So that's the best chance of waking up to some snow. But with the sun angle where it is right now and temperatures bumping up as we head into Friday, whatever does fall for the island and parts of Labrador isn't going to last too long. Temperatures should be hovering somewhere between 2 and about 4 degrees through the day. Warmer though, away from that onshore flow, especially along the south coast. 6 degrees in Marystown, 8 in Port aux Basques. Actually, that looks like that's where the nicest weather will be as we head into Friday. Even up across Labrador, temperatures in Happy Valley Goose Bay hovering around 6 degrees through the day. Otherwise sitting somewhere between 1 and about 3 across the Big Land. So Friday evening into Saturday, things are still going to stay a bit wet. Another round of moisture will move in as we head through the day on Saturday. This one looking like it should be showers. We may see some flurries still in the mix, some wet snow in the mix, but overall it will be warmer, a little bit warmer, and also the better chance of that shower activity. Up across Labrador, fairly quiet. This is when we're going to start to see that shift. Temperatures are going to start to climb up, especially as we head into the end of the week, early next week. So daytime highs again, still somewhere between 2 and about 5 degrees. Warmer still as you head towards the west coast. 8 degrees in Corner Brook, 7 in Port aux Basques. Again, another beautiful day for you as you stay in that offshore flow. And then Labrador between 2 and about 6 degrees through the day. So the long range forecast, not a whole lot of change. Unfortunately, looks unsettled, gray skies, chance of showers or flurries in either the morning or afternoon hours, and overnight lows 1 to 2 degrees. So we're really talking about a 1 to maybe 3 degree difference in temperatures over the next couple of days. And then for central Newfoundland, you're going to see a bit warmer. It does look gray, though. We may see a few more peaks of sun, very briefly for central, but the best weather will be on the west coast as we see those temperatures between 8 to 10 degrees. Now for eastern Labrador, there you go, 10, 11 degrees as we get into next week. And then western Labrador, you'll see a similar forecast, but the chance of some flurries or showers will stick around. Now, this shot, I love this one. This is of Topsail Beach. I believe this was on Sunday. Gordon captured this photo. Nice and calm, beautiful blue sky. Thank you for that. If you have any weather photos that you would like to share with us, best place to send them would be email them to nlphotos@cbc.ca.
I love the reflection of the clouds and the water there. Is that a paddleboard?
Oh, more than likely. Yeah, it looks like it.
Very cool.
How lovely.
Does look like a lovely day at Topsail Beach.
We're just getting closer and closer and closer to summer. So
yeah, just need to get through the next 5 days of nasty weather.
Just ignore the snow.
Yeah.
It's all good.
Yeah.
Everybody will be happy.
Don't put away your winter coat yet.
Not yet.
Well, that's it for us. Thank you so much for joining us.
Good night.